Welcome to the Mindset Matters, the podcast where psychiatry, medicine, and real human experiences collide, all through the eyes of two psychiatric PAs.
We're your hosts, PA Mercedes Dodge and PA Jessica Spissinger, two passionate psych PAs on a mission to bridge the gap in mental health care.
So whether you're a provider just here to level up your psychiatric insight, increase your mental health skills, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we shine a light on the incredible work PAs are doing in psychiatry and beyond. Our goal is to build a community focused on better patient care, professional growth, and personal well-being.
This podcast, a little disclaimer, is for educational purposes only. We're not here offering medical advice, psychiatric advice. If you or someone you know needs support, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional. All right, guys, let's dive in. Welcome, everyone. This is Mercedes Dodge and Jessica Spissinger. We are doing our mini mindset, and today we picked the topic of burnout. And so let's jump into it.
I think burnout is such a great topic because I feel like to some degree, people are almost getting a little burnt out on talking about burnout. And it's making them gloss over and not be as attentive to the real concerns.
And I think that just going back to the history and why we need to talk about it and the terms we need to learn so that we can provide better wellness packages for ourselves is what I really want to dive into. Let's jump into what really is burnout. Burnout is really about three large components. It's not like a diagnosis. It's rather a psychological syndrome. I want to clear that out. I think a lot of people think burnout means depression. We'll go over that a little bit, but it's not the case. It's not part of the DSM, but it is so important to talk about. It's about prolonged exposure to work-related stressors. And there's these three key dimensions. It's emotional exhaustion, feeling overwhelmed, drained, like you have nothing left to give. Then you have depersonalization, feeling detached from and disinterested in others. So this is cynicism. I don't know if you've encountered this, Jessica, but providers you've worked with or supervisors you've worked for, and they're cynical. Have you run into that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I talk about that too sometimes with my PA students. It can lead to this moral injury of just talking to people who you really admire and hear them come out with such cynical, negativistic statements about patients.
I'm sure they weren't like that originally, right? A lot of us go into medicine feeling like we have a purpose. We're going to help people. We're going to save lives. We're going to heal. Then over time, this shift happens in how we view the world and how we take care of patients. Taking care of our own wellness is so important for the patient's wellness. So the third dimension of burnout is the lack of personal accomplishment. So this is you are questioning the meaning and the impact of your efforts. So those are the three key dimensions of what burnout is about. But let's go back to history. The concept of burnout was developed in the mid-1970s, actually by two researchers working independently, East Coast, West Coast. So let's start with psychologist Herbert Freudenberger. So he was working long hours as a psychologist in a free clinic in New York, and he was a caregiver himself. And what he realized is he's just exhausted. He wrote a lot, and I loved his quote. He said, "People, like buildings, sometimes burn out, and the inner resources consumed by fire, leaving emptiness inside." And so that just shook me because we're probably intact outside, but empty inside. Another researcher at Berkeley, Christina Maslach, developed the MBI, which is one of screeners that we can do for provider wellness in your facility. So she was at Berkeley, and she was interviewing teachers, police, healthcare workers, and she heard all these themes coming to light during these interviews: exhaustion, detachment, loss of accomplishment. So then she created the burnout inventory, and now that's become the standard for measuring burnout. So together, they helped us bring in the language and the science that burnout isn't weakness. It's a recognized syndrome, and it's coming from real human experiences. Did you know that history?
No, and I feel burnout, it's become such a buzzword in our everyday nomenclature to realize that it was identified so long ago and it's been built upon. It's really interesting.
And I think that adding to it, how is it in our lives that we've experienced it? I actually go back to, I think, a pivotal period the past decade, actually just 5 years ago, is COVID. And I learned a lot of our colleagues and other medical professionals, this is a tragic thing that happened that changed our lives in medicine. I like to start with the story that I learned about Dr. Lorna Breen. She was an emergency medicine physician in New York. serving in the height of the COVID pandemic. She had no psychiatric or psychological diagnosis before the pandemic, but burnout took her and she actually took her life. Her only risk factor was that she was, a medical professional. She spurred the enactment of the Dr. Lorna Breen Healthcare Provider Protection Act that was enacted in 2022. And I think they just reenacted it this year. So this story, as sad and heartbreaking, I think is something that reminds us that burnout is pervasive. And so the statistics here, although mainly MDs, you can see how it goes through all individuals in the medical profession.
I'd be interested to hear studies on other professions. I actually lost a social work colleague before I became a PA, and it was a very pivotal mark in my career. I'll never forget that story. I know there's been a lot of research into physician suicide with PAs for such a smaller field by comparison.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some statistics. When we look at the research and numbers, there's always a story behind it. And we don't want to forget that, especially with our work. Over 50% of U.S. physicians experience burnout. There was an APA survey that came out, PAs, that 41% experience at least one symptom of burnout. Another statistic said 20% of PAs experience significant anxiety related to their professional roles. They're pretty powerful, and I think we all know it's there. And I think one of the things that when we dive into burnout is the narrative has to change. The previous narrative is blame the individual, only if they weren't strong enough. But the reality is that misconception is really harmful and has led to many individuals being silenced. Research tells us the story that burnout is there. 80% of burnout is tied to actually organizational systems, systemic factors, not individual weakness. It's been a period that we will never forget. It has helped us change the narrative, and there's not going to be go back to normal.
When physicians are applying for their license, they have to state if they've ever had any kind of mental health or substance abuse issue. And if they've seen a therapist or had treatment, that can really cause problems with them getting licensed. And again, I think that's changing, but historically, that's been a huge barrier for physicians getting help.
Yes. One of the things that I was going to raise, what are the barriers for medical professionals, including MDs, PAs, to get treatment? And one of them is, how is it going to impact their licensing? There has been movement in changing the language in the medical application. Not all states are on board yet, but year to year, there's more increase in that language change. So let's move on to talk about real life examples. Let me give you two terminologies that I think we need to learn more about and differentiate between work-life integration and work-life balance. Okay, so work-life balance is like a scale of sorts. In my early PA career, I worked 8-hour shifts, but reality was working 12 to 14 hours. Over time, I had to take a hard look and say, this is not good. I need to create boundaries. I need to protect my personal time. I was completing chart notes at home. So I had to create these things like, I'm not going to bring charts home, or I'm not going to check my email after 6 p.m. So I had to create these boundaries. That's work-life balance. Work-life integration is more of a puzzle where the pieces of work and life overlap. Advocating flexible scheduling. In one of my jobs, I was able to coordinate a schedule to do breast pumping breaks. I had to schedule it, advocate for it. It wouldn't remove my productivity quality measures that we get based for our bonuses. And then another job, I had to advocate admin time and specific midday of the week. Because I was a leader there, advocating of my flexible scheduling allowed me to bring my kids to school. Work-life integration is more of maneuver and navigate. Did you know that difference?
I've never heard that delineated. And everyone throws around the work-life balance statement all the time. The integration sounds so applicable. And I wonder if it's a slippery slope between the two.
I think it's important to be in a system or organization where they understand the difference and that they have an open mind. Because I'm assuming many listeners have gone through more than one job in their life. And they'll notice leadership plays a factor and the work culture plays a factor. If your workplace knows and understands the research then they're going to be able to do that flexible scheduling. But if they don't know the research, guess what? You're going to have to show them the research. And that's why I think diving into research is so important. I wanted to take a closer look at what the data tells us about work-life balance amongst the PA. So this is actually based on the 2023 NCCPA report. And what they said is that 72% of PAs report they're satisfied with work-life balance, but 28% are not. The other thing that this report showed is that workload drives satisfaction. So PAs in non-primary care specialties like dermatology, pain medicine report higher odds of work-life balance satisfaction compared to those in primary care. Primary care providers working 40 plus hours, seeing 40 plus patients a week. That is one of the biggest factors in having lower satisfaction. I worked in primary care, so I know this is true. I'm not encouraging people to get away from primary care, but a lot of people are moving away from primary care specifically because of this dilemma. But I will tell you from my personal experience, it's really having the connection or understanding in the leaders in my organization, the clinical team. So that includes my social support with the MDs, NPs, MAs. If there's a positive cultural wellness, even in the deep, I would say, death of medicine, because it is like a lot of work to try to get every patient taken care of every 15 minutes. But if you have a support team that's there doing it with you and they're willing to navigate and problem solve, that's the best situation you can be in. But there's always areas for improvement in any organization. The third thing from this slide is gender and debt matter. Male PAs are nearly 30% more likely to report satisfaction compared to their female colleagues. Additionally, educational debt significantly reduces satisfaction. But race, ethnicity, or location, like if you worked urban versus rural practice settings, show no statistically significant difference. So what does that really tell us? Work-life balance is complex, driven by personal factors like gender and debt, but then the systemic challenges that this alluded to, workload, specialty demands. So addressing these issues will not just be personal self-care, but it's going to be institutional policies to change the narrative. Then this slide, it's basically showing the research that has been done on burnout in providers. And so this was a slide presented at AAPA conference in 2020 by P.A. Brusa, an NCCPA research scientist, and she shed the light between work-life integration and burnout in PAs. PAs dissatisfied with their work-life integration were nearly 3 times more likely to experience burnout. This speaks to the systemic issue, focusing on how integration is necessary to meet both our professional and personal needs. This can be examples such as, will the organization allow you to work 1 day a week at home doing telehealth, or taking a mental health day every quarter, or shifting your schedule because of childcare. That's where work-life integration plays a factor. These studies don't stop here in identifying these stressors. It actually gives us insight that there's actionable stuff we can do. Organizational factors such as workflow, inefficiency, lack of support, all of it plays a role in burnout, more than personal resilience. To support work-life integration, we need to keep talking about flexible scheduling, hybrid telemedicine roles, and integrated team-based care models. Let's talk about the burnout spectrum here among PAs. In the report, the 2023 NCCPA report, 65.8% PAs, a good majority, report no symptoms of burnout. But what I wanted to break down is of that 65.8%, 13.5% truly enjoy their work and have no signs of burnout. But 52.3% experience occasional stress but maintain resilience. On the other end, 34.1% PAs report at least one or more symptoms of burnout. If we break it down further, you'll notice that 25.4% are in their early stages of burnout. So they're feeling that physical, emotional exhaustion, while the 7% here are experiencing persistent frustration and stress, which is alarming. What's really scary is that 1.7%. These numbers are a stark reality that many thrive in their role, but a significant portion of PAs are burnout and need help.
Now, are these, I know you talked about like the specialties versus primary care. Is that sample for that survey? Is that all different specialties like primary care mixed
You're
in?
right. It's everyone mixed in.
Every,
Yeah.
okay, interesting.
These are the takeaways of the slides that I went through, what burnout really is, risk factors, long hours, inflexible schedules, and then the PA stats about work-life balance and integration. Burnout can lead to depression, which mediates job satisfaction. It doesn't mean that if I'm burnt out that I have depression. It can lead to a change in our mental health. Mental health is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being, which will impact how I think, how I talk, how I act, how my relationships are, how I manage stress. And so I always want to just take a moment. I think a lot of people don't say they're burnt out because then they have a stigma as like, I have a mental health issue.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think a lot of us have mental health issues, but we don't talk about it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've always said that generally most people feel like either they acknowledge and they're insightful about their mental health struggles or they're in denial on some level. You only get a diagnosis if you go and get seen.
And I think that's also a barrier for providers and patients alike to get seen. They're scared of what it will result. And I think their gut instinct is something's not going well, something's awry. I just want to mention how mental illness is so hard, but it can be treated. I think of it as like an invisible bruise, easy to dismiss, but deeply painful. Please, if there are signs of burnout, if there's signs that you're just not happy with how things should be in your life, your vision, how your relationships are, get seen, get evaluated, having the support of a trusted mental health professional, whether it be a therapist or a mental health provider that can do medications, at least getting that first step is going to be helpful for your healing.
When somebody's stuck in this mode and they're uncertain, it's like an alarm bell that something in your life is out of balance. And by seeing somebody, it doesn't even have to end in a prescription, but just the experience of being able to externalize and express what you're going through can give you your own insight just by hearing some of your thoughts reflected back to you.
Oh, completely. And I think that's where we're missing the boat on promoting mental health in the medical professional world. I think that a lot of us providers need to do a thermometer check on our mental health, and that'll allow us to provide the best care to our patients.
I'd also like to say, just spending some time on some PA forums, I'll sometimes see quite a few PAs, different providers expressing that they don't really know where to go with their careers. They've tried a few things. And my hope for this podcast was to help support our profession and people who are in that space where they're struggling to realize that there's so many ways within our PA profession that we can lean into our role in our education to promote health all across the board, our own and others.
Yeah. I think what I've learned is that you find the people in the medical world that you connect with. And if it's not working for whatever reason, reflect and make a change. And that might be advocating for certain things, or it might mean changing the job, but there's no perfect job. So finding and prioritizing what's most important for you is a learning experience. For me, it was finding colleagues that I felt like I was being seen as a person and a provider, not necessarily just a provider and a number of how many patients I'm seeing. This slide talks about how burnout is more than just being overworked. It's a crisis. And so there's both personal and professional implications that we talked about a little bit, how it can impact our relationships, our personal and professional relationships. It can lead to depression. It can lead to substance abuse. And these factors can escalate to this unthinkable thing that we talked about with Dr. Lorna Breen is suicide. Tragically, suicide risk among physicians is disproportionately high. Male physicians have a relative risk of 1.4, and female physicians have a risk of 2.4. In another study, and this is an old study in 2011, among 8,000 surgeons, 6% admitted of contemplating suicide in the past year. Only a quarter of them sought help. It's super sad. That's why I wanted to share this miniseries because there are so many barriers. There's the stigma, personal and cultural, and then there's that licensure disclosure that you talked about. So a lot of people don't seek help because they hesitate. There was a statistic that said 60% of PAs hesitate to seek help due to the fear of professional repercussions. We have to be preventive and proactive. We have to catch the early signs within ourselves, to talk with our colleagues, check in with your colleague. You don't know how people are doing. I see a lot of masking. We don't know how well our colleague is doing or not doing. And that's why social support at work is really important, to check in with each
To
other.
not put up a positive front. It's okay to
Mhm.
be authentic and vulnerable and be human.
Being part of an organization or a clinic or an office that is willing to make organizational policies that help prioritize wellness. So I think those are things that you should be looking for in a position or a job. But if it's not there, know that you can start advocating and making change. You be the mover, the shaker of change. Burnout is far reaching. It impacts personal, professional, and clinical. I think we forget that if we're not addressing burnout, it's going to show up in our work. There's going to be more medical errors. You're going to have poor quality of care to your patients. And actually, the research shows that providers that have burnout, their patients that they take care of have longer recovery time.
It's interesting. What do you think too about having medical errors or lower quality, maybe being more vulnerable for board complaints or malpractice suits? And then think about the mental health stress that would come with that.
It's a cycle. And the impact is large. The other big number that came to me was the financial impact on the healthcare system. It's approximately 4.6 billion a year.
That's a lot.
There's the issues, the consequences. We talked about burnout, psychiatric disorders, substance use, disruptive behavior, cynicism. We don't talk about this enough, and this could be another spinoff too, is aging-related challenges. A lot of individuals go into medicine and it's their identity. So now they're 70, 80, and their cognitive abilities are declining, but we don't want to step away from work because it's been our identity. There's some organizations, I think Kaiser has that integrated in their wellness program. As we get older, we should recognize it's time to take a step back from providing care. We used to do the triple aim for patient care, and now they're thinking about this quadruple aim. It's focusing not only on improving patient care, but lowering costs and population health. The fourth one is clinician wellness. There is something called the Charm Gold Foundation Charter of Physician Wellbeing. It's a really good guiding principle that I would recommend read, review, hopefully embed it in their larger organizations, because it's talking about organizational culture, changing policies and leadership priorities. So it helps create more sustainable healthcare systems where both the clinician and the patients are thriving, because you have to think about that fourth aim, the clinician wellness. There's so many things we can dive into. At the end, I wanted to do a quick breath on, okay, this is all great information. So what do we do now, right? I want to talk about assessment, diagnosis, treatment, just how we think about it when we're doing our evaluation with patients with symptoms. So we do this on both a personal and organizational type of process. So first, we assess the situation. There's a problem. How do we diagnose how big the problem is and how do we treat it? That goes back to the questionnaire, the MBI, the Maslick Burnout Inventory, the psychologist. Remember? So that's the gold standard, but there's all these other tools that you can use for determining what are the contributions to the burnout, what are the things that need a focus. Each of them focus on a little bit of different things, but all deal with burnout and how to navigate the severity and what to do next. Some of them are free, some of them aren't. You just have to figure out what your organization is willing to do. What can we do? We have to look at it with three fronts: the structural, the social, and the self. So the structural, I already talked about. You have to have a organization that wants to change, right? And if they don't, then you have to advocate and show them the research.
And that's a big point of promotion for PAs to work in leadership positions.
I think that PAs are in the prime position because we're collaborators. We work well with MDs. I feel like we are just a mindset of collaborators. So I do think that we all could be potential leaders in a healthcare system. And I'm seeing a lot more PAs being or CMOs. And so that is an opportunity for a lot of PAs to step up and do it. Social. So social, I mean, I talked about it, having colleagues that you can share a meal, that you feel connected with, going to conferences and creating that community. And so I think that's where Jessica, wanted to create this podcast, create a community online that brings people together. And so we need that to take on burnout. The last one is self. We can go into maybe self-care and self-habits and another spinoff, but we do need to do that 360-degree on our life. Are we doing things that are meaningful? Are we optimizing our sleep, our eating? Are we reflecting on what we're thankful for? These little things add up and they really do help. Colin West said, we need to get back to collegiality where we can lean on each other for mutual benefit. So building that sense of a community should be as essential as any protocol that you implement. The last breakdown intervention that I'm going to do is the WellMD Stanford model of professional fulfillment. It outlines 3 interconnected components: cultural wellness, we've talked about it, efficiency of practice, making sure that things are more efficient, like workflows, system challenges, and personal resilience. We talked a little bit about self-habits, enhancing our physical, emotional, and social well-being. I always want to mention personal resilience, but it's not as important as cultural wellness, the foundation of supportive health. So cultural wellness, it's really an organization to promote self-care, personal professional growth. It's having normative values, leadership commitment, leadership value. Like the leader needs to be walking the talk, being able to recognize and appreciate people, not only just at the annual meetings that you have, but quick check-ins and showing gratitude for workers in your office. This is how we change the culture in our organizations. Efficiency of practice. This is the part that I do done a lot of workflows, and it's looking at what's inefficient, taking too much of our time away from patients and just practicing medicine. There's a lot of areas that we can improve on workflow, and efficiency isn't just about cutting steps. It's really about making things sustainable that support clinicians so that you're able to come in, practice, and thrive. Personal resilience, we talked a little bit about having peers support you and building that support system. What I would emphasize here is that PA programs continue to integrate provider wellness in their curriculum because students will eventually become clinicians, focusing on just your mental health, exercise, diet, mindfulness. I think all of those are really important. How do we take care of ourselves? So there's a employee assistance program. Much organizations have this. It's a free, confidential, short-term counseling for stress, burnout, personal challenges. It's confidential. It's an employee benefit. A lot of people aren't aware of it. And then there's other programs, but every state is a little different. So we're not going to go into that. But what I want to say is if anyone is listening or knows a colleague or someone that is suffering or having thoughts about suicide, consider reaching out to crisis line like 988. And then we talked a little bit about the barriers, and there are changes happening, systemic changes in regards to medical license applications and changing that verbiage for states asking for, have you ever sought treatment? The takeaway from this mini series is that it's primarily an organizational issue. We need to support systemic changes. Know that the protective factors for burnout includes having a positive team culture, it's having positive relationships, and you're not alone. I want to reiterate that wellness is for both providers and patients, and I encourage people to advocate for change. You did this for the right reason, going to medicine. It doesn't have to end with leaving your job. We are part of the change in provider wellness, patient wellness, healthcare system wellness. So don't lose hope. I think that is my main hope.
There's a big movement in the MGB system among primary care family physicians who are unionizing. In numbers, pulling together, we can really get our voices heard.
Thank you, guys. And I hope you enjoyed this quick mini series and is now engaged to making some change and learning more about how you can help provider wellness. So until next time, thank you for joining.